one of the things I'm trying to do with my website and my courses and my podcast is really give people listening to this like a really sort of clear picture of what this business is like. And one of the questions I ask pretty much everybody who comes on my podcast is this idea of, can you do licensing as a career? I mean, it's obvious to me that you are looking at your clients and listening to how much these different spots pay. I get a lot of people answer this question very differently, and it seems like the consensus among supervisors and music libraries is that you can, but it's really hard, and there's very few people. Like somebody I interviewed a couple months ago told me there's probably only 20 people in the country that make a full-time living licensing music, but yet I keep finding people that obviously are. So this is a long-winded way of asking you, what is your take on doing this as a career? How viable is it to build this up to a substantial revenue stream, which it sounds like you have?
Yeah, it is hard, and I guess that there's the way we did it, which is doing original music and coming as composers as opposed to trying to marketing our music that we would do anyway, as a band or songwriter.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, when we started doing what we're doing, no one was doing that. This was in the mid '90s, so it was actually kind of frowned down upon that, bands wouldn't want to be in a spot. It felt like selling out or something like that. And certainly it's completely come the exact opposite.
Right.
Now it's a viable way. It's one of the only good ways to it's an excellent way to get your music out there and get some recognition. So I mostly know it from, opening a music house, and I definitely think it's possible. There's always people that need music, and, it's hard. It's hard to get started. It's one of these things that once you get started and get going, it's not that hard to sustain, but it's very difficult to start out, and it can take a long time. But, there's the slow way, which is how I did it, which was I just said, okay, I'm in business. And, that took years and years and years. Maybe if you're doing, as working as a subcontractor for a bigger music house, that's a good way to get started.
Mm-hmm.
If you're just starting out and you're open to any opportunities, I think even working at an ad agency or a production company is not a bad idea, because those are the people that you're there at ground zero when people are looking for music. And, perhaps you say, hey, I got some music, I can write music. And someone will say, yeah, okay, why don't you try it?
Yeah.
It's actually probably a great place to be for getting an opportunity. And I think once you have opportunities and you deliver the goods and people are happy with what you've done, it gets easier and easier to get the next job and the next job.
And for your listeners, it's a really important distinction for people to know the difference between a non-exclusive publishing agreement and an exclusive publishing agreement.
Yeah.
And the main thing is that with a non-exclusive company, you're not giving them the rights to your music in perpetuity, forever. And this was sort of a continuation of my publishing education that started in Nashville and just sort of transitioned into how it applies to TV and film, music licensing and sync fees, and all of the ways that, you can generate money from your songs. So I stumbled in. Luckily, I didn't really find any what I would consider bad deals. I saw some kind of silly deals along the way that I just passed on. But when I met Bob at Black Toast Music, that was the beginning of sort of the education on, why would I ever consider giving any publisher exclusive rights to represent my music? And believe me, Aaron, I've had this conversation with every musician, that I've known for probably the last 20 years who asked me about this. And it's a really scary commitment, I think, for any, songwriter or someone that, values their copyright to make. I tried to do due diligence and talk to a lot of his artists. He already had a large exclusive catalog of music, so it was pretty easy for me to talk to his other songwriters who had worked with him for a while. And ultimately, I decided that at that point, the 5 records that I had, it's about 60 songs, that I was going to do it because I wanted someone that had skin in the game. I wanted someone that, wasn't going to take me on unless they really thought, they'd be able to generate income from my songs. That's kind of a long answer to your short question, but that was how I stumbled in. I stumbled in really by trying to network and going to these different, conferences that some of them were performance rights organizations. Some of them were just sort of Los Angeles songwriter groups, just kind of trying to find similar minded people who were looking for other ways, to maybe get their songs used and generate income, in a industry where it's getting harder and harder for independent musicians to make, much income off of actual physical album sales.
Cool. No, that's great advice. That makes a lot of sense. I wanted to circle back to one thing, Michelle, that you mentioned a few minutes ago, and you were talking about getting songs in films, and we sort of changed the subject, but I wanted to come back to that real quickly because you talked about reading Variety and Billboard and sort of doing research. Is that how you recommend artists go about trying to get their songs in movies? In other words, should they, I mean, I'm sure some libraries obviously play songs in films as well, but do you feel like it's better to go directly to the supervisors for films?
I feel if the supervisors are supportive and accessible and available, yes. Because first of all, financially, if your songs are in libraries, usually the libraries are not participating in sharing the sync master fees with you. Some are, but some aren't. Some you're just getting back end.
Right.
And also the fees that the reason why the music supervisors use the libraries in addition to easy access is the fees are less. Okay. So there's a system of if it's from a library, the fees demanded are less. Like for instance, I had a song on a network show last year. It was a CBS show, and the sync, they thought the song was in a library because it had been used on a CBS show previously, and they had record of that. But it wasn't. It was from my catalog. Had the song been from the library, they were paying $750. Because the song was mine, they paid me $2,000. It wasn't
Gotcha.
a library piece. It was an actual piece of my catalog. So it's more lucrative. The back end stays the same. The royalties, that doesn't change on. But for the front end, the fees are actually less. That's why all those libraries exist, to help funnel less expensive music. So for that reason, it's better. But if the music supervisors are available, then it's wonderful to go to them because you get to work with them directly, be really creative with them, and get to know them, and hopefully they'll use your music again. And it's a direct step. So I prefer that. I would think they would want to work more with the artist and writer as well because it's kind of nice, right? It's kind of creative rather than going to the library. But again, it's all good. I mean,
Yeah.
put your songs in libraries. Libraries are wonderful. They do great work. And the people at libraries are doing the same thing that I'm suggesting. They're research. They have people there that are researching what's going on, what the projects are, as well as supervisors coming to them going, help, I need this Cossack music in 10 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus, it seems like a lot of music supervisors, I mean, I guess everybody's different, but it seems like a lot of them don't necessarily want to be solicited directly by artists. What percentage would you say in your experience are actually open to that?
I agree with you that they don't love to be approached, but if they are approached and they're in a good mood and have time, they will be there. So I mean, I wouldn't have a percentage. I mean, all these music supervisors that I know, which is 1,000, 10, 11, 1,200. I know so many of them have all been receptive to knowing me personally and
Yeah.
been very nice. Most of them. There's a few that have not been nice at all, but forget those, right? We only want to work with nice people who are nice to
Right.
us, and vice versa. But for the most part, they've been very nice, and we'll take a moment to write a quick email that says, I don't need anything right now, or shows are done, or thank you again, or so. I feel that they will be, if you write them properly. I always mentor people this. So I think part of the problem is that people are very impolite these days in this world of texting, where no one uses any pleasantries. And one has to respect people and their time. And one has to thank them. And one has to say, I know you're busy. And I thank you so much for listening. And I hope this finds you well. And, some pleasantries, please. Thank you. I mean, I love this show, and I do some research about the show. I saw the show, and I think my music would fit because I heard this music, and it's, I feel that my music is a good fit, and something that makes them feel like you're not just sending them random music. I think they're, and again, look, I once had a project where I wrote this music supervisor, and I said to him, I just called him actually, and calling is not good anymore. It's much better to write. But in the days of calling, I said, so I got him on the phone. You need anything for anything? He said, no, but can you do this? And he needed an instrumental. No, and that was an instrumental. It was to a vocal that he'd recorded a marching band arrangement of the Star Spangled Banner.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I had no idea how to do that.
Yeah.
But I said yes. Right? Because always say yes. Someone says, do you have French music from the Middle Ages? Yes.
Yes, I'll
Yes.
do it.
And find someone to do it with and go get it. Go make
Yeah.
it. Because
Yeah.
if you say no, all they hear is no.
Right.
But again, this person was nice and very receptive. I cold called and I got that gig, and I did it with my partner. I grabbed him and we did it, and it was in the movie, and we got paid, and it was fabulous. So but he was open to talk to me for a second, and because he had something on his plate, he was happy to get it off his plate.
Yeah. So you just happened to connect with him at the right time, and you said yes, obviously, instead of saying no, even though maybe it wasn't something that you were accustomed, stylistically to doing. You went for it, and obviously it worked out.
Exactly. So that's why I feel that if you approach the music supervisors and they're in a moment when they need something and it's fresh on their mind, they might get right back to you and be totally receptive. And you might write them at a moment where they're so swamped that they just delete your email and they cannot deal with it. And 85 people wrote them for, soliciting today.
Yeah.
So, it's all human. We're all human. And so try again.
Yeah.
Like I believe in, as long as you're polite, try again. I mean, my Nick Carter song, I pitched 4 times to the same A&R guy.
Exactly. Because I work
Right.
with a lot of musicians who don't necessarily want to tour. Maybe they're a little bit older and they just want to. It seems like a lot of musicians turn to licensing to sort of monetize their music and not necessarily tour behind it. But obviously, what I'm hearing from you, and maybe you can, confirm this, is that you really, realistically, you probably need to tour, to really bring in a full. Like, it seems like it's more about multiple revenue streams. Is that what you're saying?
Well, or this, ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC, they all do showcases. They all do, for instance, ASCAP sits at the Tribeca Film Festival, BMI sits at the Woodstock Film Festival. The film festivals, getting out, being in front of directors. I mean, if you're a singer-songwriter and you've got an arsenal of new songs, and to be able to get a little bit of a showcase with one of your PROs not a bad idea. Maybe that's not about money, but maybe it's just about getting out of your studio and being seen, meeting people. I find that, sometimes, I like going to the film festivals for that very reason, because you do meet a lot of writers. You are there of course, with the producers and directors, and you've got to be out. So, to stay in your studio and just say, oh, this song's going to get picked up and placed, and I'm going to make, hundreds or thousands of dollars, and this is how I'm going to live. I'm being really, the devil's advocate to say I think that's not really realistic. But, if you had a really good music supervisor, for instance, and there's a whole bunch of them, I work with, and I personally know, like the Sue Jacobs and the George Draculises of the world. If you got in good with one of those guys, perhaps, and Sue Jacobs does manage some composers and stuff like that too. So you could have that really lucky day where just a supervisor falls in love and just you're the go-to person, and that's what happens. That's that is all in all possible, but it is sort of the diamond in the rough and trying to do that. But I would suggest that if I understand not getting in a van and going around the world, but if you just in your local communities see where the closest film festivals are, keep in touch with your PROs and ask, like, are you doing any writers rounds? Are you doing any showcases? Are you doing any film festivals where I could be seen and heard by people? And I don't believe in paying money to do that. Like, coming in, you don't have to be paid, but also, I think people might put together things and say, oh, you have to pay to be a part of this and to be seen by these people. I don't like any of that either. I think just talking to your PROs and understanding what's in the community that you could do that is film, television, and documentary related, where you can be with other creatives and be seen and heard by them freely, and get some extra added exposure would be great. I really implore speaking with your PROs, and that's the other thing too. Everybody who's composing should be registered with one of those, so royalties are collected, broadcast royalties are collected properly. At the end of the day, those cue sheets are submitted, and you're getting the money that you're due. I had to have people coming back at me going, I was in all these episodes during blah 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 season on, I don't know what, logo or something. And I'll be like, well, okay, what PRO are you with? Well, I'm not. And I'm like, well, how do you expect these broadcast royalties to be collected? So, there's the sort of the 101 of music licensing, which I'm sure you're very, very aware of. But swinging all back around to that, it's a really good thing to be, registered. You have to be, and also to ask for help, to go online and see what they're doing locally. I know it's very difficult if you live maybe somewhere in the Midwest, but you never know. There could be some kind of interesting festival going on, or they could be doing a writer's round, or you might just want to take yourself to Nashville or Los Angeles or Chicago or New York and get out and sort of put a little bit of your budget into being somewhere to be seen and heard, and pass out business cards and that kind of thing. That's what I'd recommend. But you kind of have to do everything, hit the ground running and run in a lot of different directions these days, to make that living.
Interesting. So let's say sort of hypothetically, because most of the people that listen to this podcast are artists and songwriters, and they play in bands, and they're obviously interested in licensing their music. Would you say that most of the artists that you work with, are they writing music specifically kind of anticipating these types of projects, or are you just working with their existing catalogs and they happen to have music stylistically and lyrically that fits advertising? Which sort of approach do you see most writers taking?
I think it's usually the latter, and I would argue that to make really good music, it's really hard to write it with all of those criteria in mind. It really does start to sound formulaic as soon as you're paying too much attention to it. There are some writers who just write really great ad music. That's what they gravitate towards. That's what is natural to them, and that's what feels authentic. But you can definitely hear when somebody is writing something because they've been told that these are the things that work well in advertising. And sometimes it works, and I'm guaranteed we've licensed a bunch of that too. But I do think the ones that are the most exciting and the things that feel the most authentic to us are tracks that came out of a band or a songwriter's organic creative process and just happened to work really well.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's sort of seems to be the consensus, because I'm asking different people that I interview sort of this same series of questions. And that's a question that I ask everybody that I interview. And over and over, I'm really hearing that you should just write what you're inspired to write. But it almost seems a little counterintuitive because it does seem like there's such a specific type of music that works for advertising. But like you said, maybe if you just happen to write music that sort of aligns with that vibe, then that's the best sort of approach to take, just to write what you write and get it out there.
I think so. I really do think in licensing there is a place for everything. There are more places for certain things, but we've licensed everything from Russian hip-hop to heavy metal to punk to any of those fringe genres that you really wouldn't necessarily think you'd find a spot for. There are spots for everything, but I think when somebody who writes in one genre starts trying to write in something different just so that they can have the commercial viability of writing for advertising, it really does start to feel like they are writing for advertising. And it's hard, and we find it on the original side too. You're trying to find writers who can write for advertising without sounding like they're writing for advertising. And sometimes that's in the production element, sometimes that's in making things sound a little bit more like a song than a score, but there's definitely tricks and tips to it that as you write more, you can kind of figure out. But I do think the best tip for anybody is to write what you write and write it well. And sure, you can play with different elements that might work better, but recognize that if that's not the area that you write well in, not to force it. And there is somewhere that your music will fit.
I like that response because that still gives you as an artist sort of a sense of creativity. You're not trying. It's not just about making music a commodity. It's still about creating art. And when it works, it works. But I think the bottom line is you should write sort of from the heart and try to be authentic. I've licensed a little bit of instrumental music. It's something I've been getting more into recently, but it seems like with instrumental music, there's just less hurdles to jump over. It just seems easier because because there's no lyrics, and obviously with lyrics, the lyrics need to work in the context of whatever the scene is. Like they really need to make sense. So it just seems like instrumental music is easier in a lot of ways.
Right. So why even get involved? Because that's what our clients want, and because you can get more money with a vocal in certain situations. A vocal, traditionally, it's just going to pay more out. If it's a vocal track, you're automatically getting more royalties if it's going on TV, a higher royalty rate. So
yeah, because it's used more prominently.
Yeah, sometimes they'll slip it by and say, well, it's actually still an incidental cue because it's playing on a jukebox in this scene in the background in a bar. It's not really a theme. You get that every now and then, but for the most part, when you're pitching vocals, it's for a more prominent type placement. So that's why people are doing it. What I tell people, and for your listeners, if you're going to get into vocals without having it being commissioned or specifically requested, stick to universal themes, stick to universal lyrics, and there's a real easy way to do that. Figure out your theme, what you're going for, and do not stray off of the estate, so to speak. If you're talking about the party, and that's the track, you have to think about concepts that can be used in a multitude of ways. If you're going to write a song about being sad and depressed, okay, but that's all you're going to get. So, how much sad and depressing licensing do I do? Not much. If I had to pick it, if I were going to hedge my bets, I would go with happy always. If I'm strictly thinking about money, and creating library vocal cues, and then so if you narrow that, I'm telling you all right now out there, do your sad cues, go for it, but don't expect a shit ton of money from that. Pardon my French, people. I'm from New York. Don't expect a lot of money from that. I know.
Like I said, curse away.
But what about the children? You got to think of the children. There might be some
the poor children. I don't think that I have too many children listening.
Good.
I wouldn't worry about it. But let me jump in really quickly. Let me ask you a question. Like what you're saying rings true. I've heard this so much over the years that you should focus on happy music, but it kind of doesn't make sense if you think about it. I mean, there's so many TV shows and films with plots and subject matter that have sad elements to them. So I'm just wondering, like, why should we focus on happy music so much? Isn't there a need for sad music as well?
Because library, it's simple. Library music transcends just television. That's why. Let's talk about advertising.
Okay.
How many sad songs have you ever heard in an advert, which pays probably as much, if not more, than well-done films and high-budgeted TV shows? How many sad songs? I mean, there's a few, sure. I can think of that Indian that was crying during the forest fire. That old Indian commercial where I'm not forest fire, but the pollution thing from the 70s. I'm old. I'm trying to think of sad songs. That's the only one I can think of. Is the Native American crying while some moron is like throwing trash on the floor on his dirt.
I don't think I know that one, but point well taken.
Yeah. Anyway, there's not a lot. And why happy sells? You want people to feel good about a purchase. You want people to feel, if we're talking about quote unquote smart products, you want it to be simple. You want it to be fun. You want it to be a happy experience. Why do you think Apple, when they first launched their little bells and claps and ukuleles, why do you think that worked so well? Because when you're dealing with the psychology of how music works, it makes perfect sense. You have this new device that fits in your hand. You could talk to anybody in the world. You could see them. You could do all this crazy computations and all sorts of stuff you couldn't even do in the Army back in the 70s with their technology. You have this in your hand now. If you have a complicated or high-tech sounding track or something that is sophisticated, you're going to be basically freaking out all of your non-tech potential buyers. You put bells and claps and stuff that sounds like a nursery rhyme, then the message is, man, even a kid can do it. And that is why Apple sounds the way it does, and that's why they all followed suit, and that's why all the advertising, that's why bells, claps, and ukuleles rode that wave for 5 years or 6 years. It's still going on. You still hear it. And it's evolved and morphed over time. But, I mean, all you listeners out there, I mean, how many years have we heard with the ukulele, bling, 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 the stupid glockenspiel melody on top, over and over and over again? Why? It's happy and it's simple. That's the perfect mantra to sell a product, especially a technology product, health insurance, something complicated. Life is complicated. This is how I'm going to make your life easier. That's the sound. That's why it's here. So happy sells. If you want to make money and you're starting out, if you don't have a lot of records in library, composers and musicians out there, do happy. Start off happy. You'll make more money faster. You'll establish yourself. Then go deep and bury your soul. But right now, if you really want to get in this, make happy music. Make it sound good. Make it current. Make it sound like pop music. That stuff flies off the